us Ganapathy Venugopal, who's the co-founder and CEO of Axilor Ventures. So to talk about Mr. VG, as you know, he's fondly referred to. VG is VG co-founded Axilor Ventures, which is India's best accelerator in India, along with Infosys stalwarts Chris Gopalakrishnan and SD Shibalal. VG is the CEO there. Axilor Ventures is the only early stage investor in India to have a 3-stage program to support startups with their accelerator, scale up, and early stage funding. So far, they have backed over 125 plus companies. And in fact, their support program is one of the most sought out after and the most highly competitive in India, with applications running into thousands for just the 20 startup slots, in their cohort every 6 months. I'll not be wrong, if we call Axilor as the Y Combinator of India. They've been setting up trailblazing years in terms of their support for the entrepreneur ecosystem. Before Axilor, VG was with Infosys, where he was head in strategy and planning. I'm pretty sure he's going to blow you away with the kind of insights that we have. Every time we speak with VG, I've always been blown away the kind of ideas that he can articulate with us. I'm sure you would also be, really happy to hear him speak. Thanks for the rave feedbacks that you gave for yesterday's session. I'm pretty sure even today you would be very happy with the session. VG sir, the stage is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Varada. It's always a pleasure to join an event of startups, and I've had the pleasure to work with Varada on several initiatives. So thanks for inviting me over. These are times of crisis. So first of all, thanks to all of you for taking time out to join a session like this. It is good to see all of you not having given up in these times of crisis and looking at moving ahead. So Varda asked me to share some insights around fundraise. So I, after having worked in the last 5 years with a number of startups, and this is one of the key outcome metrics of our work with startups. So I thought I'll use the next 20-25 minutes to share with you my thoughts. I'm a good product of the Indian education ecosystem. So I am not that good at speaking and sharing my thoughts, but I'm very good at answering questions. So first 20 minutes, I'll just share with you my high level thoughts, and hopefully, how you think about fundraise process will change as a result of it. But I would be more keen to take any questions that you specifically may have and share with you our experiences and my thoughts around it. Yeah. So, like Varda said, we run the largest and possibly the #1 accelerator in the country. So as a result of which we screen about 1,500 odd startups every year. And then we get the opportunity to work with the selected 35 to 40 startups. And during the first week of them coming in, as part of the induction, we ask them a number of questions, but the two most important questions we ask them is, what are the top 3 goals that you have? And we also ask them, what are the top 3 things that you hate to do as founders, right? Interestingly enough, on the top 3 goals for startups, funding always features, right? Because most of the startups coming in are bootstrapped, or even if they have been early angel funded or friends and family route, getting some kind of institutional funding is certainly one of the top 3 things, if not the top thing that they would like to achieve. Paradoxically enough, when we ask them what are the top 3 things that you hate as founders, just to understand their blind spots, funding features as one of the top 3 things that they don't like to do. right? So on the one hand, you can imagine the consequence of this mental model, right? You believe that this is something very important, but as founders, this is also not something that you like doing, right? So it shows up in multiple ways. So when you look at fundraise, right, in for sessions like this, and I'm sure you have had several other speakers talk about it, there are different ways to approach, right? And it is not like anybody speaking to you will be able to change the odds of success of your fundraise in a 30-minute or a 45-minute conversation. So some people talk about the mechanics of it, right? How do you need to reach out to investors? What are the things to do? What are the things not to do? There are a few things that people speak about in terms of skills, right? How do you pitch well? How do you story tell? There are some which focus on execution, right? Talk about your traction numbers. What is it that you have done better than most of the startups, right? Talk about the numbers that put the startup in a good light, right? Some talk about the founding team backgrounds, why you are the best teams, right? All these are important. But in my view, I think the most important factor, right, or the most important thing that if you get right, all other things will fall in place, is the mindset with which you approach the entire fundraise process, right? And that, I think, is the critical link between this. Funding is very important to me, but I don't like to fundraise, or I don't like the process of fundraise. So my view has always been, as founders, if you are able to build a mindset, the right mindset for the fundraise process, your odds of success will be much higher. And I always encourage our founders to ask themselves this question, irrespective of the problem. What is the one thing, if it happens well, all other things will become easy, or will become will fall in place, right? When it comes to fundraise, this is the first question, right? If you kind of engineer your mindset well, then everything else becomes easy, right? Talking about your team, talking about your value proposition, right? So what are the important components of the mindset that will improve the odds of success of this process, right? As founders, we are taught to focus on our strengths. So this process is no different, right? It is impossible for founders to become great storytellers. These kind of skills take over a period of time. It is impossible to artificially create a traction number that will make any investor look up, right? It is impossible to change your backgrounds, right? So there are a number of things that we have as weaknesses, which kind of get amplified in a fundraise conversation. So rather than focusing on all the weaknesses and trying to get better, I think if you approach it from a position of strength, what is it that we are already good at? What is it that we already know how to do? The process becomes much easier, right? So in my view, what are the top 3 aspects of the mindset that I talked about, right? And what is the overarching theme? One thing that as founders that all of you are pretty good at is selling to a customer, right? I haven't seen that as a challenge in any of the startups that have gone through our program, right? All of them are very clear about who their customer is, what is it the problem that is getting solved. They're not scared of pitching their value proposition, right? So this is something that comes naturally to founders in addition to building out great products. So my suggestion when it comes to building the right mindset when it comes to fundraise is to treat fundraise as a sales process, right? And when you treat fundraise as a sales process, when it comes to pitching to your customers, you're kind of convincing them the value of this product, and finally get a check written in your company's name for the value that your product delivers. When it comes to investors, it is exactly the same process. The output is still the check that they have to write in favor of your company. Only thing, what you're selling is very different from the product, which is like a tangible thing that you take to your customers. So not to belabor the point, if you look at fundraise as a sales process, there are 3 things that become important: the who, what is the problem for the customer that you're solving for, and how do you go about it, right? How do you build out your sales process so that the chances of conversion is high? Like I said, in the first week when startups come into our program, or even when we do seed funding and we have the first month meeting, right? One of the things that we certainly look for is whether the founders know who their customers are. So most founders, 9 out of 10 founders, are very clear about who their customers are, right? They also have a prospect list. They have laid down some qualification criteria. They know exactly who within the customer organization is the likely buyer, right? What are the methods to reach out to them? Do you already know somebody who's working with that company? Is there a go-to-market partner that you can take alongside, right? So all of you are fairly clear about, when it comes to reaching out to your customers, who the customer is, who could be the set of prospects. You have it in your Excel sheet. But when I ask founders, okay, now you want to fundraise, right? Whom are you going to raise it from? I don't see, in 9 out of 10 cases, they say that we want to raise seed funding. And after that, when I push them to ask, so tell me the 5 seed funds that you would like to raise from, they have no idea, right? So the first thing I would encourage all of you to do, if you were to approach this entire fundraising process as a sales process, with the sales process mindset, is to be clear about whom are you going to raise this funding from, right? Is it going to be angels? Is it going to be seed funds? Is it going to be tier 1 VCs? And angels is a fairly easy one because it's primarily based on familiarity or references, right? The need for validation is not that high. So that process, I'm sure all of you can figure out because it's a person-to-person interaction. But when it comes to seed funds and VCs, it is not that difficult to find out based on the focus areas, right? Most startups adopt this spray and pray approach, right? I will look at traction, I will look at venture intelligence, I will look at all the VCs, try to get their contacts and write to them, right? More often than not, your pitch lands up in an analyst table where they are comparing it with, along with some 80 or 100 other inbound mails that they get. So it becomes very difficult for you to really stand out or get picked up. So if you were to bring in the same discipline that you would bring to your sales process, a good thing to do would be to really have a targeted list of the 5 or 7 funds that are interested in a business like yours, right? That could also mean that you will have to eliminate those funds which have conflicting investments. If you happen to be in a sector where there are 2 other companies that have already been funded, it is highly unlikely that the seed fund or the VC that has put money into your 2 other competitors, right, is likely to consider you. Mostly people will tell you the conflict upfront, but by which time you reach the partner, you would have already spent a lot of time chasing the wrong set of people. Whereas it is very easy to figure out early on where the conflicts are. So having a clear prospect list, having a clear idea of which are the funds that are interested in a business like yours, having a clear list of people who could otherwise be conflicted and hence fall outside your consideration set, all of which you will do for your regular business when you are seeking customers. Just bring the same discipline onto the fundraise process, number 1, which answers the question of who. Second thing is, what is the problem that you're solving for the customer? What is the story that you're taking for customers? As people who are selling, as people who are taking the products that you have built out to your customers, right? All of you would have made this transition of talking about what the features of your product are to talking about what the benefits are. And you must have figured out that when you start talking about benefits, your sales conversion is definitely better. Your value proposition is a lot clearer to customers and the sales cycles are much shorter, right? Why? Because unless you are able to demonstrate the empathy of what your product can do for your customers don't really care, right? So for a moment, if you just take that argument onto this fundraise as a sales process, and if you treat your investor as a customer who's going to write a check for you, the question to ask is not how great your startup is. It is not about how technologically superior your product is. It is not important who your customers are. It is not important, your plans for the future, right? So all of these things are easy for you to talk about because these are all things that you know quite well. These are all things that you believe are important. But if you were to apply the same discipline of moving from feature to benefit, it is important for you to talk about what you bring to the table and what is the problem you're solving for, right? So for a fund, whether it is a seed fund or a VC, they have raised money from a number of people whom they call limited partners or LPs, towards whom they have made a promise of being able to generate a 3x return within a typical fund life cycle of about 5 to 7 years, which means that they are using the first 2 years to raise the fund, another 3 to 4 years to deploy the fund, and another 2 years to exit. So the important question for them and the language that they understand is, are you the company which if they invest in, they will be able to see a reasonable exit? In most cases, the test that they apply is, will you be able to return the fund? Which means that will you be a 10x multiple generator for the money that they are putting in, right? And the seed and the VC industry is in some sense a cottage industry in India. It is not that there are a lot of funds. Let us take, there are 100 active funds. Each of the funds have about 2 partners on an average who will be able to write checks. That's a total of about 200 people. Now, each one of these 200 people is going to make maximum of 5 to 6 decisions in a fund life cycle, right? So they see thousands of opportunities, and the test for you to pass is whether you will be able to communicate to them so that they see you as one of the 5 or 6 companies that they choose to invest in, with the stated objective that you will be able to kind of give them a 10x or return their fund for them, right? So I will pause for a moment, right? And all of you, if you have been either already having fundraise conversation, or you have begun to think, or you have started talking to people, the pause is for you to reflect and ask yourself, when you are pitching your story to investors in the context of a fundraise, how do you rank yourself on this particular scale of being able to communicate that you will be a 10x for a fund partner? I'll come back to this when we have the question and answer session, and when the moderator unmutes all of us so that you can share your feedback. But it is a good question to reflect. And when you are practicing pitching, when you're talking to people, or when you're preparing along with your other co-founders, always have the other person ask you this question: have I been able to communicate this value proposition? Because if you treat it as a sales process, with the success being the check being written by an investor who believes that you can generate the fund, you should be able to communicate the value prop that matters to them most. And this is what matters to them most. If you are able to do this well, trust me, the chances of your fundraise success, you've already improved it dramatically, right? So that is the second thing. The third thing is, as all of you as founders must have figured out, right? Acquiring customers doesn't happen by accident, right? Once you have identified who the customer is, second, you have identified what is the problem you're solving for them, and you have sharpened your value prop, right? You also have to dedicate time, right? And one of the first thing that we ask any founding team when they set out on fundraise is twofold. Number one, have you really made a choice, and is it really important for you? Because if you have not made a choice, and if fundraising doesn't feature in as a very important thing for you to accomplish for yourself or your business, right, then don't start. Because this half-hearted attempts to fundraise definitely leads to no output, right? No success, no outcomes. Because investors are people with high attention deficiency. They are people who are, who have a lot of companies asking for the same thing, which is to get them to write checks. So the minimum that they would want is that the founders are serious about this process. They don't like wasting time on people who are tentative about this, and they can, trust me, smell your tentativeness, right? Number one. Number two, fundraise is one of the founders' full-time process. Just like a customer sale doesn't happen by accident, there has to be a salesperson, there has to be an organization supporting the salesperson to put the best foot forward. There have to be a refined sales process that will take you to the right outcomes. It is one of the founders' full-time processes, full-time jobs, right? And if as founding teams, you are not able to dedicate, right, one of the founders taking this up as full-time, please forget about it, right? So you have to make the choice. It has to be important in your scheme of things, and one of the founders will have to be full-time. I have found so many startups for whom it is not even clear which founder's primary objective or primary goal or primary motive is to lead the fundraise process, right? It is more often than not a shared responsibility. It is more often than not something that also happens while business is growing, which means that there is no learning, there is no iteration. One of the things that most founders look at, when they interact with investors, is that they treat it as a binary process, right? Which means that you are measuring the outcome of the process as a yes or no. And more often than not, it is a no. So you get disappointed, disheartened, and move on to the next set of investors. But if you treat this process as a feedback process, and you ask yourself, by the second conversation that I'm having, assuming that the first conversation has resulted in a no, have I used the first conversation to look at what are all the questions for which I don't have answers for? What is the primary feedback that has come about the pitch, about the team, about the product, about the market, about the narrative, about the story, right? Which I have learned from and take to the next process. Now, this learning loop becomes much easier if there is one founder who is leading this process. Otherwise, this whole learning is dispersed. Nothing happens. You are still the same set of founders and same company by the fifth conversation that you are having. Whereas if you improve 15-20% with every conversation, right, by the fifth conversation, you're 2 times better, right? So I will stop here. I made 4 points. Number one, approach the fundraise process with the same metaphor that you have for a sales process, because that is something that comes naturally to you, rather than force fitting all the different ideas and doing stuff that you are not good at. Within the whole metaphor of fundraise as a sales process, bring in the same discipline that you will bring to any customer sales process, which is knowing very clearly who your customers are. Second, being able to communicate the benefit that you bring to the table, which in this case is, articulating it in a language of returns that they understand, right? And third is, it's one of the founders' full-time job. Sales doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by inbound. You're lucky if it happens, but you can't take it for granted. So you have to dedicate one founder full-time for this entire process, and keep learning from one conversation to next. You look at each conversation as a feedback conversation than just a binary outcome-based conversation of yes and no. Because if with every conversation you are able to get better, you are able to develop better answers for the questions that you didn't have answers for during the conversation. By the fifth conversation, you are a completely different team. And none of this is my opinion. We apply the same discipline to all the startups that come into our program, and it invariably works, right? So from among all the other advice that you have, you should listen to those advice. You should pitch better. You should story tell better. You should articulate sharply what your product and value proposition is, what your differentiation is. But I have seen that the founder's ingoing mindset about the fundraise process, right? Is the most important link between the fundraise success and what you go in with. If you are able to make these changes to your mindset, all other things will kind of fall in place. So I will stop here and will be more than happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir. We have one question from Ajit Kanak. But just before that, in terms of building a sales process, how many funds should, at least during the, in terms of the time process that would take to raise funding, and how many kind of funds should have entrepreneurs at least met before they kind of stop fundraising or kind of like that? I was like, because in sales you have like a funnel that you built. What do you think what do you think would be the number on the top of the funnel that entrepreneurs should try to hit?
Yeah, finally, you should be able to get somebody to write a check, right? And you don't really have the luxury to stop till you get that outcome. But I would encourage people to have a first list and a second list, and at any given point in time, have some 3 or 4 conversations so that you keep learning from these conversations. And it is quite possible that you will be able to find funds which tell you that you are too early, right? So they, while that is a genuine feedback, there is nothing stopping founders from asking the same people who are saying that you're too early 2 questions. Number 1, at what point and at what traction level will I become relevant for you, so that you have a certain goal to work towards. Number 2, you can ask all these people, given that you are saying that you are a little late stage and we are early, is there anybody else you think from your network that we should be speaking to or will be interested? And you will be very surprised that more often than not, these 2 questions get you answers that will be extremely useful, because it opens out a new network. You get a new set of more relevant people to talk to, and it tells you very clearly as a business at what kind of milestones you should be hitting, right, for you to become relevant to others, which is the point I was making in my 3rd point, that do not look at any investor conversation as a binary process and measure it only in terms of the yes or no response that you get. Treat it as a feedback process, treat it as a process where you can seek help and keep improving your chances of success.
Sure. Thanks. Just one related question is, thank you for the idea, sir. I will be using this at Venture Intelligence to convince entrepreneurs to buy our products. But coming to that is, so while we used to, some entrepreneurs used to reach out to us and we used to help them shortlist. But now we have a list of funds who are like clearly matching the requirement. And we have a few funds who might invest. So one of the entrepreneurs asked me like, should I go from the top of the list or should I go from the bottom? Because he had some instances of, if I go talk to the top, and if they reject me, and can I go back again, or should I like practice myself from meeting some of them from the bottom and then go meet a serious investor?
See, I think if you look at it from a usefulness perspective, even on the feedback side, mostly the kind of feedback that you will get from either partners or principals at the senior level who have a similar portfolio company or who are deeply invested in this space will certainly be far more valuable, right?
Sure.
So it may be a good idea for you to select a list of people whom you believe will not be interested. I mean, will definitely not fit in your, your startup may not be relevant to them. And people who necessarily don't have a conflict in sharing advice. Use 2 or 3 conversations with such people to get feedback on what is missing in your pitch, what will make it valuable, how would other investors look at it. So because they are also not conflicted. Use that feedback to come up with a list of people that you should be speaking to. But finally, like in any sales process, it's a confidence trick, right? If you think you're confident to pitch to somebody, you're confident. If you think you're not confident or you're not ready, you're never going to be ready, right?
Sure.
So you owe it to yourself and to your startup to muster enough confidence. But you can take out a lot of fear from the process. just by focusing it as a feedback process, right? An S is good, but no is not that bad.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Ajit from Sandbird. So Sandbird, I think, makes agri equipment. They tend to make it automated agri equipment. So he has a question is, where do the investors focus more of in terms of the story or in terms of the financial numbers and any other decisions that they use to make decisions? Which is the kind of factor which investors give most preference for?
This is not a straightforward question. First of all, it is important for you to understand, every fund, every partner has a certain investment philosophy, right? In many cases, the funds have actually put this out, right? These are the things that we believe in. We override one particular factor over other. But rather than looking at what people say, always look at what people do. So a quick look at the kind of investments that they've made in the last 6 months will give you a good sense of what kind of founders they work with, what kind of founder backgrounds they're comfortable with, what stages of business, what characteristics of the business. So it must come easily. Activate your network. Look at what kind of companies and founders these people have invested in. If possible, talk to some of the founders that the funds have invested in. That will be far more insightful than coming to your own conclusions or trying to answer this question on, what do they care about. Instead of listening to what they say, look at what they have done.
We have a question from Arvind from Viverva Health. I think they're a healthcare app for patients in hospitals. So his question is simple: is like he's a single founder and he also has the responsibilities of managing the operations also. So can you give us some tips and examples of single founder companies in your portfolio who have successfully raised and any practices that they have shared?
We had first of all, I should say that, a lot of people ask me this, right? Is being a single founder a disadvantage?
Yes.
Right? And I tell them that, is being a single parent a disadvantage, right? It is not like it's impossible, but it's very hard, right? So, yes, there have been cases of single founders. We had a company called Multibashi. The founder was Anuradha Agarwal, right? She has done exceedingly well. But the number of such companies is not that high, right? But empirically, if you look at it, a lot of companies, what happens is, even if it is a founding team, by the time they come to a Series A or Series B, many of the other founders fall out, or one of the founders is kind of leading or first among equals in the pack. So the question is not so much about single founders or otherwise, right? The question is about whether you have enough capacity, enough capability in the team, right? That is required for the startup success. And also, there is a time and place for co-founders. So if you're already 1 year out, it's very difficult to build that level of familiarity with the startup. So I think you should just reframe the question to see what is it that the startup will need for their success, and whether the capabilities and capacity that you have within the team will get you there.
So we have a question from Justin from Hopsay. He's providing blockchain-based solutions for the hospitality industry, and he says that we have a sizable number of beta hotel clients, upwards in thousands. He says that it is important for the entrepreneurs to show what kind of a story that they have going in the first 2 to 3 years. How should they like not sound too ridiculous when they're trying to pitch this one? How to make sure it's believable, or how to show is there a concrete way of showing that this is what we're doing and this is a reasonable target that we can?
See, when people talk about, whether you're going after a large opportunity, whether you're able to communicate a good enough story, everybody knows that it's a punt on the future, right? The gap between the credibility gap between what you claim you will do and the likely reality, right? The chances of startups meeting their original vision or aspiration, that number is not very high, and also the mortality is low. I think any good investor will know that whatever you say in terms of what you're going to build out, there will be a lot of changes along the way, right? But the important thing is that you have one, because otherwise you are just leaving it to serendipity or leaving it to a chance for it to evolve, right? You need to have one against which you can test out the reality, right? You believe that you are building the largest business in a particular category and you have launched it, and maybe your customer segment has shifted, right? So it's never easy to predict what the trajectory you will take. But the two important thing is, number one, you have one vision, right? Because without it, you are just like a rudderless boat, moving around based on the wind, right? That is not something that people like. You need to have one. Second thing is, even when you project out the market size and all that, it is not so much about the size of the market as it is about the mental arithmetic that you can bring to it, and what is it that you believe will be a reasonable plan for you to achieve. So I think the discipline of having one is more important than what it is.
Sure. We have one question from Abjit from Warhorse, which I think is a gaming company. He says, given that investors have an exit-based strategy, what kind of honest conversations can founders have with their investors in terms of directing the direction of the company towards that kind of a exit, to that solution?
See, this exit conversation is not something that is very relevant, or it's quite premature at the time of investment. This will become important once the investor has been in the company for some 3-4 years and they are exiting their funds exit life cycle. So I've seen some founders say that these are the kind of exits you get, but when it comes to exits, I think investors put in a lot of effort into understanding, and they have fair idea of what is it that they can do with the company, so long as the company hits certain milestones. So at the time of fundraise in early stages, it's a little premature to talk about exits.
A lot of investors,
because the immediate goal for
yes,
an early stage investor, especially a seed fund or a venture fund, is that they are able to put more money into you in the next 2 rounds at least.
Sure. Because there is always sorry. Yes, sir. Please go on. Please go on.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Because there's always a request from the investors to include a slide on exits. So what would be the best way to kind of have that tackle that slide?
I think if you are able to give the confidence that you will be able to raise a lot of capital in your next 2 rounds, and the business can support that kind of capital, I think the focus on exit will go away.
Thank you, sir. I think we have Sriram from Kire Kadai, which is into packaged foods. He has a question on what are the equity stakes that you see in early stage funding. What are the typical stakes it is that a founder should be willing to offer for a right size deal?
I think a lot of founders spend a lot of time looking at the analytics of fundraise and dilution and equity and all that. But there are some broad thumb rules, right? If you're looking at anywhere between 1.5 crore, which typically means that you're raising it from a clutch of angels, I think you should look for a 10% plus or minus 2% dilution. If you're looking at somewhere in the 3.5 crore, which is about $500K US, it means that it's an angel platform or a seed fund or a seed check being written by a larger VC. There, the rule is 17% plus or minus 2% dilution. if you're looking at $1 million plus, which is about 7.5 crores and above, it's only going to be a seed fund or a VC. There the number should be 25% plus or minus 2%. That's the broad ballpark. All these numbers take into account what kind of dilution you need to have in a certain round, so that it doesn't work against you in your subsequent rounds. So 1.5 crore angel kind of round, 10% plus or minus 2%. A 3.5 crore 500K round seed or angel platform or early stage VC round, 17% plus or minus 2%, $1 million plus 7.5 crores and above, 25% plus or minus 2%. I think that's broadly the thumb rule. You can try to optimize and minimize as much as possible.
Just a minute, I'm just going through some of the questions. We have a question on, in terms of market size being too small, how do you kind of convince them in terms of the growing market, or like, I mean, like, how do we kind of handle that question, sir, in terms of market size being too small? So we have that
you have to come up with a large market size. There's no other way out.
So this is a question from.
So either your current product can support a large market size, or you have to create a product roadmap that will lay out that while today you're looking at a particular market, you will be able to go into some adjacent markets. Because for an early stage investors, that is the only insurance and that is the only external reality, right? If you do whatever, however good you are, whatever however superior product is, however much your customers love it, if it is going to be a very small market, then there is no play for a VC.
Yes.
The chances of you being able to build out a fairly profitable business is very high, which is not a bad outcome, but it is not a judgment either. It just doesn't fit into the risk capital model.
So we have lost you, sir.
I was saying that there is no judgment in terms of why VCs are not interested in small markets and all that. It is just how the model is played out, and there is nothing wrong in being able to build out a good, profitable, smallish business that has a respectable 20-25% annual growth rate. It is just that it doesn't fit into the VC model.
Right. That was a question from Arul from Snack Experts, who does, I think they supply B2B package, they supply packaged foods for B2B, customers. I have an interesting question from Shravya from Nakuras. She says, are returns the only primary aspects investors look into, or are there other factors that entrepreneurs can also appeal to? Nakuras is an impact startup trying to support jewelry from marginalized communities.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it just as a customer through the customer lens, right? And in all of your running businesses, right? The question is the same, right? Would you want to run businesses in which customers love your product, your passion, your vision and all that, but are not willing to pay for it? Right? And the second important question you have to ask yourself is, what will it do over a medium term in terms of your right to exist, right? Because businesses, if you look at it through the financial angle, will have to earn a respectable return on capital for them to continue to survive, right? There are a few impact investors whose thresholds will be lower, but I think if you are talking to an investor, it is not possible to duck this question of does financial return matter? It does.
Just to confirm, sir, the winter batch applications are still open, right, for Axilor?
No, the winter batch applications are closed, but the applications are open. right through the year. So people can continue to apply. We will just take them in to consideration for the upcoming batch.
Sure, sir. Can you give some insight?
Actually, it is for the it's for the summer. Summer one is over, because that is something that we will start in the next few days. But the winter one will start sometime in August. So.
Sure. Can you give us some insight tips on qualifying the huge list that you get, sir? I mean, because the acceptance rate is so low, how can startups kind of increase their chances of getting into Axilor?
Yeah, I mean, the formula is quite simple, right? Your chances of early stage fundraise success is broadly this: your potential to be a category leader multiplied by a large market opportunity, multiplied by the team being the right team or having it. I mean, they should have a right to win in this space, multiplied by early signs of product market fit. It is not like we do any other magic. We look for these four things: whether you are a category leader and whether you are going after a large enough market opportunity comes out of our own analysis and our understanding of the different spaces, given that we work with so many startups, corporates and other investors. Whether you are the right team is something that you need to communicate very clearly, and early signs of product market fit is also something that you need to create. We expect founders coming to our program to be full-time. So if you're doing this as one among the many things, then it doesn't make sense. But it's largely a bet on the team and the category you are going after. So if these two are big ticks, the chances of you at least getting into interview is very high.
This is a very specific question, sir. From Skyraptor, they manufacture drivetrains, I think, for electric bicycles. And he says that since the electric vehicle is a pretty new market, how do we showcase the valuation? And he says, how can I look about the valuation number of my company to my investors?
Yeah, like in early stages, there is no science to valuation. You just make sure that your dilution is ballpark within the market range and raise money to grow.
Folks, please keep your questions coming in. I'll just pose them to. Sir, how would you define product market fit in the simplest of words, sir? Because very early stage companies, what would you think is the answer for that?
The problem that you are solving for should be fairly clear, and it should be there should be demand for your product or service among your customers, number one. Number two, the sales model should be very clear. What is the channel? What is the cost of acquisition, right? And outside of these two things, something should have become so easy for you compared to many of your competitors. It could be sales, it could be customer onboarding, it could be customer acquisition, it could be gross margin. Something should have become very easy. Finally, product market fit is about how many things have become easy for you, right, across your customer journey. But within that, I think the stability of your sales channel and your cost of acquisition and all of that is key. And what is the problem that you're solving for should be fairly evident. That cannot be in a discovery mode any longer.
Sure. One maybe a question bit outside of the topic is, given that we are in such difficult times, and we've already seen some startups pivot because their businesses are no longer held due to the condition. Can you share some experience on successful pivots and how entrepreneurs can go about handling this situation of the pivot decisions?
Yeah, I mean, there are many examples, but more than the examples, I think the discipline that leads to pivot is to be able to listen to what your customers are saying very closely, right? In most cases, pivots have come out of two things. One, whatever you set out to do is not finding any traction at all, right? Then you really reflect and ask yourself the question of what do customers really want, right? That is one way. May not be the most desirable, but that is definitely one form of pivot. And you will find that there are several examples where people have spent tons of money before really coming to this question of do my customers really want this? When it comes to this particular aspect, raising a lot of money early on is a serious distractor, because it encourages you to put money behind things that may or may not work, right? Number one. The second most important source of pivot is listening to customers in terms of what more do they want, right? But in both cases, the founder's mindset that is important to take in is not to fall in love with your current product idea so much so that you are unwilling to get market feedback. Either the market is not willing to adopt your product, or your market needs something more.
We have one question that was asked yesterday as well, in terms of how do I know that this is the right amount for me, for the company and so on, the right funding amount?
How do I know the right amount, right? So there is, it is not a question that you should belabor a lot, right? You should define, right? I had written it in my blog. One of the resident advisors at Axilor defined it rightly so, right? The right amount of capital that you need is like the right amount of fuel you need to move from one place to another, right? So you need to make sure that you have enough and more fuel left before you reach the next gas station, right? Which is on the way in your journey, right? Assuming startup journey, right? So you should neither fall short, nor that you're not clear about what your next milestone is. So define your milestones in terms of whether it is number of customers, whether it is the GMV, whether it is the revenues, or whether it is the size of your business, whatever it takes. Define that milestone that will make you ready for the next round or the next capital raise, or for you to turn sustainable. And treat the current raise as the amount that will take you there with a margin of error of 20-25%, because you almost always underestimate the capital you need to get to a certain milestone. I think that's the only way to look at it. Vardha, one last question.
Yes, sir. I think we are nearly done, sir. I don't think we have any questions. Maybe just one question on how should, what are the kind of, this could be a little bit outside topic also. What are some of the key metrics that entrepreneurs should be focusing on and not get distracted with anything else? How do they figure out the true, because you're a very data-driven person in terms of how you set up Axilor and how you think about how things get done. Can you give us some tips on how, invest? We would like to see more entrepreneurs see from that perspective also. So can you give us some tips on bringing that kind of a thought process?
See, the only metric that is worth measuring is the metric that tells you whether you have hit your product market fit, right? Whether whatever you have built out is something the market is willing to adopt. Number one. Number two, and defining that what constitute product market fit is also a discovery process, because it is not as intuitive as people make it out to be. And that is more often the metric that your next stage investors are looking for some evidence that you have made progress on. Number one. Number two, founders, just like any other aspect of human beings, right, end up measuring the ones that are easy to measure, right? The number of new users who have come and the number of customers that I've added. If you look at the relevant metric through the lens of product market fit, you will develop a more nuanced view. It is not so much about the number of customers. If each customer is, spending about 5,000 rupees on your platform or for your product, if you're in the enterprise space, as it is about having 5 customers who will be willing to spend 2 lakh. The difference between 5,000 and 100 customers and 5 customers and 2 lakh is that the relevance that your product brings in to your 5 customers who are willing to pay 2 lakh is much higher, right? Or if you're in the SaaS space, again focused on enterprises, how easy it is for you to build out your customer funnel, and what is the cost of doing so, right? And what are the different losses at each stage of customer onboard, right? How easy it is for you to get to a certain number of demos, how many of the demos really convert. Once the demos convert, how easy for you to make a sale for a particular module. How quickly can you move from one module to multiple module? If you are in the consumer business, while it is easy to track just user growth, if it is a leaky bucket, right? Users come in and after 3 days they kind of uninstall or they fall off from your web or app. It is not so exciting as it is about getting the users in, and how much time they really spend, how many times they come into your app, how active are they, right? And while they are in the app spending a lot of time every single day, what are the things that they are doing, how much more they are demanding, which features are being used for, are those features standout features compared to some of your competitors? So you have to take maybe a second or a third order view in terms of data, because insights lie there, differentiation lies there, and those are the metrics on which your next set of investors are going to base their opinion on.
Thank you for your time, sir. I think my fingers are hurting from the notes I was taking. I had so many lot of notes.
Hey, no problem. No problem. Hopefully, some of this has been useful to all of you. Even if some of the founders think about fundraise slightly differently at the end of the session, I would think that the 1 hour has been spent well. Tough times. So all the very best to all of you guys. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Varda.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, participants. Krishna, do we want to do a team networking session now with the participants?
No, we will conclude the session right now, and
Okay.
we will take up the team networking in our mobile application. I'm also posting the link to Axilor's blog, and you guys can also refer to all the popular quotes that he has come up with in some of his blogs. We will also post specific blogs in the startup resources section. So yes.
Thank you, founders. It's VG is an amazing investor to listen to. I'm pretty sure you would have been blown away with some of the insights as well. He listens to so many pitches and has his ears to the ground in terms of working with startups. They are based out of Bangalore as well, but they also have a division office in IIT Madras campus. And he's one of the best mentors around as well in terms of giving to entrepreneurs very clearly on how they should be thinking about. Just a reminder that we have 2 other sessions on the second half in terms of storytelling and as well as startup storytelling. And Krishna, if I'm right, it's 4 to 5 and 5 to 6, right?
Yes, correct.
So please come back after refreshing, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Yeah.
If you have any questions,
yeah.
If you have any questions, obviously Krishna, Abhinash, and me are available anytime. We would also be yesterday's speech. We've kind of put it into a PDF format, which I think was shared, or we will be sharing it going forward as well.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Varda. Thank you.
Thank you, Krishna.
Thank you, everyone. See you guys 2:50-ish. Let's meet then. Thank you.